What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Brave and Faithful podcast. Today, I have a fellow Navy veteran. He's also trained in the master's level of clinical psychologist. He's got a podcast called Vet with a Mic, where it's content driven by veteran issues. Ryan, what's going on, man? Welcome to the show.
Hey man, I am happy to be here, dude. You're doing some big things out there in the podcasting world. So I was like, man, I gotta send this guy a message, man, and see if we can't do a little work together.
I appreciate you for reaching out, man. And yeah, before we go and talk about what you're doing now in the mental health field, tell us a little bit about your service. I mentioned you were in the Navy. Can you just
Yeah,
share with the audience, what you did in the Navy and kind of like how long you served for and some of the things that you experienced?
sure. So I went in August of 2008. I turned 24 in basic, so I have a little bit of an unconventional story, I guess, of how I got to the uniform. I had lived in the real world before before I enlisted.
Right,
And
right.
that was a transition for me, obviously, because I had been working out in different industries, and then all of a sudden now I had to surrender a lot of control in my life to be in the uniform, and that was an adjustment. But yeah, I was a master in arms, and I spent my first couple years in mobile security, in which I enjoyed those kind of taskings. I was out of debt Bahrain. For those of you who are also sailors, probably spent some time in Bahrain as well. And although I wasn't really there that often, if I'm being frank, because our op tempo was pretty high, so I spent a lot of time out on mission, going to all the different parts of the Fifth Fleet. But from there, I went to Sigonella, which ironically enough, our paths crossed there. Of course, we didn't know it.
Yeah, definitely.
It's one of those, let's just say, symmetry of the universe, right? Um, and then after, I guess I was probably my first year into my second command, I had just started to go, I don't think this is really the lifestyle for me. I was a bit weary. Mobile security was a lot of living out of a suitcase, so to speak. I spent a lot of time like on the road, and I was just thinking about coming home and
Mm.
life after the uniform. And so I transitioned out in 2013, and I will say that transition is a burden for all of us, but I was a little unprepared. Now I was ready to get out. I I was singularly focused
Right.
on exiting the Navy. I make the joke on my show all the time that there was probably a Rhine-sized hole in the wall. Like that's how quick I wanted to get out. But I just didn't anticipate a lot of the things that came in life after the uniform. Just subtleties like I'm from a small town in East Tennessee, and once you've seen parts of the world, it's really hard to go back
To
home
go, yeah, yeah.
and relate to people that you had relationships with before the uniform. I felt completely disconnected from them. I felt like an alien, and just being from East Tennessee, I make the joke all the time that their holiday routine is to go, I don't know, in the summertime, hey, let's go down to Panama City Beach. That's the best place in the world to go vacation. Well, I had laid out on the beaches of Sigonella or of Sicily. I'd been into Taormina.
Yeah.
My frame of reference was totally changed after that. There was just no going back. Once you've been to Oz, Kansas never looks the same, right?
Yeah.
And I felt just totally disconnected from everybody, even family members. And so I went, what the hell is going on here? Like, why is it? I don't feel like any of these people know me. They don't know who I am. And it was obviously, it wasn't that they had changed, it was that I had changed. I had seen a lot more of the world, and my worldview had just shifted. And so I spent about a year kind of floundering about a little bit, trying to find what was the next step for me. Being an MA, I thought I wanted to be in civilian law enforcement. I quickly discovered that my heart really wasn't in that. So I decided to go back to college. I kind of stumbled upon the field of psychology. and I found a natural knack with it. Did some research during my undergraduate. And then I don't know if you know this, but you can't do much of anything with a bachelor's degree in psychology. A lot of bartenders out there with bachelor's degrees in psychology. So I had to go into graduate school. And so I applied to go to grad school. And I really felt as if I had came into the next chapter of my life, so to speak. And at first, man, I didn't want to work with vets. I didn't want to work with the military at all because I know our culture, man. You know,
What made you go into that field though initially when psychology? What led you to that?
well, you know, I mean, I guess I had a natural interest in human behavior, like
Okay.
what made people make the decisions in which they do, right? And like I said, there was just a natural curiosity towards those kind of domains, and I found that there was, like I said, it just made sense to me. It was easy. Like it wasn't easy coursework, but it was. I felt as if this was easy for me,
Mm.
and I guess that's one of the things we talk a lot on my show a lot is when you go back to school after the uniform, you just have a thirst for knowledge that you didn't expect. You may not have had that before your time in the uniform. And I think that's largely because your worldview changes too. Like you change so different. Your perspective has shifted so much that you're more open to new information and intellectual pursuits like that. I don't want to speak for everybody. That was my experience. But yeah, I didn't want to work with the military population. I didn't because I understood our culture. Um, of course, I'm sure you know this, being in the medical field, you know, it's not exactly um, the most open culture to talk about things that are bothering us, right? Hell, half of us don't even want to go to medical, right? When we got something wrong with us, we don't even want to go see somebody. All they're going to do is tell us to drink water and take some Motrin. So we just kind of tough it
That
out.
there's
Yeah.
always like some sort of stigma, right? Like, I
Mm,
mean, I believe the military is getting better at it, but
mhm.
in the beginning of my career, like you mentioned, right? Like go to medical was like you don't really go to medical unless you really have to,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Unless there was really something wrong with you, like
Yeah.
so.
And
Yeah,
there's some other social pressures too. You know, I mean, you don't want to be on the light and limited duty list, right?
mm.
Because that leaves your coworkers in a bind.
Right,
So
right.
there's some pressure. There's some legitimate pressure there to not be on the LLD list. But um, on top of that, when we come to mental health, I just watched so many times commands kind of be reactionary in their nature. As soon as somebody said, "Hey, I need to talk to somebody," it was just this knee jerk reaction. And the person would be like yanked out of their workspace and put into a job where they could keep an eye on them. And of course, we know in the psychological perspective that that's the worst thing to do. You're isolating them from all their
Yeah,
social support. But I don't think the command level decisions, they didn't think of it in that way. They were just trying to mitigate risk. But unfortunately, it was
making it
reinforcing.
worse.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And of course, and here's the thing: the military culture is so alien. Well, why wouldn't an E3 that's the first time being away from home on Christmas? Why wouldn't they feel blue? Right? This is a part of our lifestyle that's a bit of an odd bird, right? There's a natural adjustment that kind of comes with the uniform, and I don't think that is often conducive for some of the command level decisions that are made. But so I knew this about our culture, and I was like, man, I don't want to work with that because I know we're going to be guarded. Often the times we get burned by chain of commands whenever we speak up about needing help about something. And people just take all that baggage with them into the therapeutic uh, relationship. And I just didn't want to have to wade through that. Right. So in my own mental health journey, though, I was seeing a VA provider, and
sure.
I came across a VA provider that just didn't get us, man. They just didn't understand the military culture. And this is a person that's working within the VA.
Okay.
And so the long story short was I felt in this VA facility, I used profanity, right? That's what I did. I said, I don't want to feel this way anymore, except I used another F word too, right? And it was kind of, like I said, just past tense. Like, I just don't want to feel this way anymore. And this person said, could you not use profanity? And at the time, I was already a graduate student being trained in mental health issues. So I knew that technically you're not supposed to do that. That's called imposing a value, right? You're not supposed to do that. But I thought about all my brothers and sisters from the uniform. If they were in this position, well, how would they have responded? They probably would have went, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And then they would just said, the hell with that. I'm never going back. Right. And that's why we have all these mental health related issues after the uniform. So after that interaction happened to me, I said, man, I got to reevaluate some things, because there's a certain necessity in understanding our culture. You have to be culturally competent to work within any given.
You have to
population.
know who you're working with.
Exactly. And there's no difference. Whether it's racial lines or gender lines, or you just have to understand what the person's contexts are when they walk into the room with you, and she just didn't get us. She did not understand the military culture. You asking me not to use profanity whenever there are so many of our acronyms that have profanity within it. And on top of that, it's just, man, this is supposed to be a space for me just to be able to use my natural vocabulary. And when you're talking about trauma, you're talking about things that are difficult to identify, you're going to use words that are more readily available to you. Right. And like I said, it was just a terrible interaction I'd had. Now, the VA did a lot to repair that, don't get me wrong. But I think that's one of the things that we have to talk about is just because you go through a bad provider, don't stop. It's just a bad fit for that person. The next two providers I had were outstanding. But if I would have just stopped right there, I could have just left with the same impression that most of us have. Screw the VA, man. They're not there to help me. But if you take a little agency within your own care process and advocate for yourself, you can get more stuff done, right? So after that experience, I said, hell, man, I got to go back. I got to get back and work with the fray, right? Back into the fray I go and work with the military population. And it just totally shifted my trajectory of my training. My research interests started to pivot towards military related issues. And that's where Vet with a Mic came in.
So how did that, you mentioned that kind of change your trajectory. How did that event change your perspective in your mental health training?
Yeah, like I said, for me, if you don't understand the culture, you cannot be effective. So there was two things that really dawned on me after this interaction. Number one, I don't know if I'm going to be able to spend 1 hour by 1 hour with a veteran one-on-one and get the kind of change that needs to happen completed. So I said, I need to potentially do some paradigm shifts within mental health, in generally speaking. I needed to talk to providers and let them know about what veterans need from them. I needed to culturally train them and what veterans need when they walk into the therapeutic alliance. And that's where the research came in. And that's where I started trying to do more consultation work, reaching out to mental health providers and talking to them about veterans issues, letting them know, hey, these are the type of things that vets come into the equation with. And if you, like I was talking to a Marine just the other day, right? This is what the Marine told me. Well, Ryan, whenever I talk to a mental health provider, they're all the time trying to make me feel bad about having to use my weapon. And I said, okay, what do you mean by that? He said, I don't feel bad about taking somebody's life. And I said, okay. He said, that's not, I don't find that traumatic. And I said, fair enough, man. That's cool. But from their perspective, they were trying to put that on him. His
Like
perspective
he should
was,
feel guilty.
yeah. And his perspective was, I did my job. I saved my brother's
Right.
life.
Right.
That's the way he viewed it.
Right.
I saved my brother's life. And if you don't understand that that's your cultural bias from a mental health provider's perspective, like you think that should have messed him up because he had to use his weapon in the line of duty. It didn't. That's not what his issue revolved around. It was his buddy in the unit that got killed in action. That was his trauma event, not having to use his weapon. And it's just bringing to light those type of issues, in which me and that Marine, actually, he's in mental health. He's a mental health provider. So I'm kind of honing in on his story a little bit there. But when he said that, I said, man, I felt that for sure. That absolutely. Those are the type of interactions that mental health providers need to know, that this is what our culture is different than what you're used to dealing with. And if more mental health providers understand those little intricacies of the mental health of veterans, then we can get a lot more work done. They'll trust you more if you stop imposing values on them, because that's your value, not theirs.
Yeah, because the like you mentioned, right? Like especially with Marines and Army, right? Like your training, things you go through training, you're trained to kill people eventually, right? Because you're trained to protect and defend the nation, and obviously your brothers and sisters to your left and to your right. And I guess to your point, yeah, just making sure that providers, it's difficult when they don't have that same experience, and they have a different lens when they're treating the veteran community.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the providers as a whole over the years have gotten better at that, or like what do you think?
I think that it depends.
Just depending on the provider.
Yeah, like much. And that's what I try to tell people, just whether you're talking about the VA or just any community care, there's going to be people who are good at their job, people that are not so good at their job. And there are just people who have bad days, man.
Yeah.
And mental health providers, generally speaking, we sit in the company of human misery every day. That can affect you in some profound ways. And you have to, I guess, give the person a little bit of grace. They may be having a really bad day. They may have had a really tough session before you walked in. And just understanding that they're human beings too, and they have their own limitations, and they're allowed to have bad days like the rest of us. And I think that we demand from the veteran community, we demand a certain level of professionalism and perfection, but often those expectations are not very accurate. So I would say, yes, that we talk about these things. That's the biggest thing. We talk about cultural competency issues. We talk about them to try to get better as a discipline, as a field. So yeah, I think that we're going in the right direction. There's just still plenty of work to be done.
So going back, you've started helping the veteran community, the veterans, and with their mental health. How did the whole, we were talking offline, you just started your podcast.
Yeah.
Where did that idea kind of come about, and what was like the whole premise of it?
So there's a lot of mystery that surrounds the mental health process, right? Is I talk to a lot of veterans, in my daily walk mostly, and they have some pretty funny ideas about what mental health is like and what the profession is like. And largely these things are based on things that they see in the movies and TVs, right? Or TV shows. I mean, why wouldn't it be, right? We've all seen things like The Sopranos, and there's like For example, the psychiatrist in The Sopranos, it's a horribly unethical relationship that she had with Tony Soprano. But those are the things that kind of seep into our view of what we can expect walking into a mental health provider. So I started answering a lot of questions from people just in my daily life about what the real expectations can be with, engaging within the mental health process. So I kind of just wanted to demystify it a little, provide a little background information, because I think the things in which we don't know in life are a lot more threatening than the things in which we know, because we're more comfortable and familiar with them. So as soon as I put something into context, as soon as I say to a veteran, listen, there's not a magical psychological test that I can give you that's going to be able to give me the legal authority to take your guns away. Soon as I say that, the bottom drops out of it. They're like, oh, okay. All right. Because that's one of their fears. That's one of their anxieties. They think that there's some state power that we can all use to just separate you from your civil liberties. That's not the way it works, man. And then they don't understand things like confidentiality, because in the uniform, when you go to see a mental health provider and they're in the uniform, it's mission first. So if you say something that makes the provider believe that you're compromised to the mission, they have to inform the chain of command. Now, in the civilian world, we don't have that as as an orientation. You are the client. It is ultimate fidelity to you, not to the mission. So what you say in the therapeutic space, with the exception of a few caveats, is privileged. It's private. It's just between you and the provider. And as soon as veterans understand that process, it takes the tension out of it. There's not going to be any reprisal for you saying something that could be taken the wrong way, unless it's something, like I said, unless somebody believes that there's a credible threat to somebody else, a credible threat to yourself, or if somebody else is in danger, like a child, somebody that's in danger of abuse. Right. Those are the kind of caveats that confidentiality can be breached for. Outside of that, man, blow off some steam. Say, say, I really hate such and such. There's not any reprisal for you speaking your mind in these therapeutic spaces. But we come into the interaction with our baggage from the uniform, because some people say something to a military provider, and then the military provider has an ethical dilemma. They have to inform the chain of command or violate the person's trust. That's the ethical dilemmas they get placed into all the time. Do they want to maintain the trust of the client, or do they want to make sure that the mission is carried out? So that's a complicated position to be in. I don't wish it on anybody. But I think as soon as a veteran understands that, it can take a little bit of the anger and the sting out of it. Oh, okay, that's the reason why they had to tell my chain. It wasn't just because they were snitching on me, right? Because that's often the perspective we take. We are very singular focused whenever that comes up. But yeah, those are just some of the reasons why I started getting into, well, what can we do at a mass media kind of level to just put information out that kind of lowers the tension around mental health issues, provides a little ancillary background information to kind of demystify the process, humanize providers, see that they're human beings that have contexts of their own, and just what the ultimate goal is, I want veterans or anybody within the military identity to be an informed consumer and utilize the resources that are out there available to you. Because after the uniform, only about 40% of veterans utilize the VA. So we got 60% of veterans out there not utilizing the resources that are available to them. And that's a disservice to our community at large.
You said only 40%.
Yeah, it's a rough estimate. Yeah.
So, you mentioned some myths about, mental health and counseling, things like that. What are some services that you can inform our audience about that, maybe not too many active duty or veterans know about as far as like mental health?
So like, you mean like therapeutic approaches that they can
Yeah,
see when,
yeah,
okay. So like say most of us have, let's just say some interaction with trauma, right? Now, when people hear the word trauma, they can think of a few different things, but combat experiences are only one aspect that trauma can manifest within. Uh, Work accidents, any life-threatening and interaction which you have can be traumatic, in which you can develop PTSD symptomology, right? And we don't really think about that a lot. We only think of like the combat experiences which veterans can have. But as you and I were talking about before we started recording, only about 15% of
yeah,
jobs within the military are within the combat arms. So we're talking about 85% of the rest of the uniform. They don't have a job in which they carry a rifle in the performance of their duty every day. But I'm going to tell you, if you are someone who has to, let's say, guide missiles into targets, and you see a very clear picture of where that ordnance is going, that's going to psychologically impact you. Or if you're a line handler and one of the lines snaps and it takes off your buddy's leg, that's going to have a psychological impact on you.
yeah.
Or any of the other occupational like hazards which being in the uniform can offer you. They're going to be trauma symptoms that can manifest from those type of experiences because they are alien and abnormal. Most people, whenever they're driving to work, don't have to worry about that. But of course, traffic accidents can also be trauma index or PTSD index events, where if you're feeling that your life is absolutely at risk, then you can develop trauma symptoms from that. Now, in saying that, there's three types of approaches that the VA will utilize when treating PTSD symptomology. So you've got cognitive processing therapy, which it changes your thinking. So a lot of the things that happen, the way we think about the world and ourself and about the future after a trauma event changes. So cognitive processing therapy attempts to undo some of those more detrimental thought patterns and bring you more into a center, a more neutral position, because they often get really negative after a trauma event. Of course, why wouldn't it? Something's just really threatening to your life just happened, right? So that's one approach. They also use prolonged exposure. So prolonged exposure therapy just is one where you want to sit with the emotional content and just kind of experience it as much as you can, right? And just build up that tolerance to it. Because one of the hallmarks of PTSD is avoidance. We try to avoid the things in which activate us.
But it only makes it worse.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, but it feels so natural for you to just want to avoid those things that cue up those, like I said, those activate those parts of our memory, because trauma memories are not oriented in time properly. So the brain, when a trauma memory gets activated, it processes information as if it's happening in real time. So that's where the flashbacks kind of happen, where you're believing it, your body, your sensory information is acting as if it's happening right now, even though logically you know it's not. Whenever you're activated, that kind of suspends. Your lid gets flipped. Your frontal lobes are offline, and you are all down in the amygdala, just responding to threat perception, and that's it. So those are the two ways that are most common. The last way in which they utilize a lot is called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy. Now, this one seems to veterans at times a little hokey. They're like, come on, man, this doesn't really work, right? Because they utilize bilateral stimulations. So your eyes track back and forth, right? And so they want you to follow this, whether sometimes it's their finger, sometimes it's a light bar, and they want you to follow it just back and forth. And people think, what is this? Hypnosis? This is silly. I don't want to do this. But what the reason why we think it works, because there's still a lot of research that has to be done. It is clinically significant. It does work with trauma. But so the moving back and forth is similar to like rapid eye movement, right? While you're asleep. So what happens while you're asleep is your brain pretty much just downloads the events of the day, and it orients it properly into the right storage bin, so to speak, right? I'm paraphrasing and I'm using more common language. It's much more Latin and Greek sounding words than this, but we're just using it for common parlance, right? So while you're asleep, this process kind of happens. But when something bad happens to you, do you ever sleep well that night? Of course not,
No.
right?
Yeah.
You don't really get good quality sleep. So that's one of the reasons why they think possibly EMDR, it activates the brain by bilateral stimulations to simulate rapid eye movement and allows the brain to start moving or healing itself from the orientation of time that has happened within the trauma memory. So a lot of people report when they activate a trauma memory, they feel as if it's happening in real time. But then after they get through EMDR, they feel as if they get some distance from it. Instead of acting as if it's happening in real time, like they can see it through their eyes, it's like they're looking at a picture. It just gives them a little bit of emotional distance. So those are the three types of approaches that are often utilized by the VA to deal with trauma. Now, cognitive processing therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy can be used with depression and anxiety and any other mental health disorder that thinking patterns are part of the problem. And, prolonged exposure therapy can be used with like OCD or anxiety and phobias. They can be used for different types of symptomology as well. And EMDR is one that's kind of its own thing there in the trauma world, but any one of those type of talk therapies or trauma therapies can be utilized for a variety of different disorders.
Okay.
I know that was a lot. Sorry.
Yeah. So you said there's three types of therapies that they used. But I kind of want to go back to, since you started this journey as far as, with regards to mental health and helping veterans, our veterans, what would you say has been, how long have you been doing this for?
Well, I guess that's relative. The advocacy bit has been much more recently.
Okay.
The research has been going on for a few years now.
And during that time, has there been any like significant events or experience that would you say was like made you feel fulfillment or purposeful in your current service now?
So I've been blessed in this regard. I get a lot of immediate feedback from listeners doing this show. I didn't expect it. Like I had told you before we started recording, I've only been doing it since October.
Yeah.
And I was essentially just a guy sitting in his living room talking about mental health perspectives. And so I was just, a lot of it was just me trying to figure out how to address problems that felt huge to me. And so I started off with, okay, that's the reason it's why I vet with a mic. It's just me talking into a mic about things that I'm passionate about. And so I didn't really expect, as soon as I started putting these things out into the public, that it would catch fire at all. It was almost like audio journaling for me. I didn't really expect it. It was just me trying to exert a little bit of control in my life over these issues that felt so like just huge to me. And I didn't know, like, I felt such a weight for my brothers and sisters out there that were just dangling in the dirt, just not, I didn't know what I as one person could do. So I kind of just turned into it. That's the reason why I'm a solitary vet with a mic talking about issues. And then whenever I started releasing content, I started getting feedback from people going, no, man, that shit, it hit me hard. Like that's exactly what I needed to hear. Those are, you just put my life into perspective for me. I didn't expect that.
Right.
And that sent chills up and down my body. I didn't expect it. I was humbled by it. I didn't, all I knew is that now I can't stop. I got to keep moving forward. I got to keep just pressing out as much as I can, talking to people like you, having these conversations that are providing a little bit of insight or relief into people's lives. Because I think largely, just like getting a mental health diagnosis, as soon as that happens, there's a thing. Oh, that's what it's called. Now everything that's going on with you is put into perspective. Like no one knows what depression is until it's clearly identified by a professional.
Yeah.
Then they go, oh man, all this time, this is what depression is. Now there's a community to draw from. There's a treatment plan. And I think largely we can have the same kind of ground breaking revelations if as a community, the veteran identity started mobilizing resources within the community and reaching out to each other and providing social support in ways that we didn't think of off the top. Because by you knowing me and I knowing you, the relationships in which we have at either one of our disposal just doubled. Mm. And that's what I think a lot of times veterans forget. We're only about 8% of the US population. That's it. But of that 8%, we know a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people doing a lot of really cool shit.
Like great things out there.
Yeah. And so since that was another thing about Vet with the Mic, we all knew about the problems, the ways we were struggling. We've heard about the homelessness. We hear about the substance abuse. We hear about the suicide. We hear about the PTSD rates. What we don't hear enough about is people doing awesome stuff like you. We don't hear a lot. So I wanted to provide a space too of models that we could lift up and say, hey, look, this is what's working for me. Is there anything that you can take from my life that I find working for me and apply it to your life? That's what we're trying to do here with Vet with a Mic too, is just to lift up, hey, here's a way that I got this thing done. Can you apply that in your life? Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no, but it may spark an idea that you didn't think about.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Right. I mean, because I think for me, like when I started this podcast too, it's more of because, you know, like you mentioned, right? Like, what do you hear when you hear veterans in the news, right? It's post PTSD, veteran homelessness, you know, the suicide rate, right? The 22 a day. So I've, you know, like it was all a lot of negativity towards the veteran community. And one of the reasons why I started the podcast too is like here are veterans, you know, that I'm talking to who are, like you said, just doing great things out there with, you know, whether that be in the local community or, you know, nationwide or worldwide, whatnot, right? Like these guys are doing great things. This is some of the tools that, you know, you can kind of take away from them. These are some of the things that, you know, experiences that they've had, and you know, be more relatable, and also, you know, see that, you know, we're doing great things out there. We just don't hear it as often.
And look, and we talk about this at least a few times on my show. It is evolutionarily sound to attend to negative details.
Yeah.
Those are the things that hurt you. Those are the things that are in the environment that potentially can harm you. So, of course, we give more attention to negative things, whether it's negative things in the news or negative things. We forget the 10 A's we made on the exam, but we remember that C, like, or we remember that D, right? So, of course, the same things apply in just our general community, right? We hear about these things because Not that they necessarily happen with greater frequency than all the good stuff, but it's just they're so much more psychologically powerful. And so when that happens, we lose focus and perspective to all the positive things. Now that's actually a cognitive distortion within cognitive behavioral therapy. It's called discounting the positive. So you, for example, if you got an A on an exam, you must have got lucky. It wasn't that you worked hard. It wasn't that you were smart and capable and you were hot shit on it. No, I just got lucky. We're doing that at a group level, right? That's kind of what's happening. Is we're going, nah, man, this is what's really happening within the to be a veteran. And civilians reinforce that idea. Don't get me wrong, because we got to start holding them accountable for their reckless comments and their reckless interactions that they have with us too. But yeah, we got to counteract the noise here. And I'm glad that you podcasts like you, KP from the Morning Formation, he's doing it as well. Scott Deluzio from Drive On Podcast, he's doing it as well. All of us are doing this kind of positive psychology spin. Of course, you probably don't call it a positive psychology spin, but that's what it is. We are attending to the positive things out there in the veteran and military space.
Love that positive psychology. Ryan, before we go into our second segment of the podcast, what's one thing you want our listeners and our viewers to take away from this episode?
Oh man, what is one thing that I would like you guys to take away? I hope that, I guess this would probably be as precise as I can make it. Number one, those who report the most psychological satisfaction, they do a few different things. Number one, they practice gratitude.
Know that.
They are grateful people. They express their gratitude for all the people in their life that are meaningful to them. Hey, you lent me a pencil. I don't know, something small. Be thankful. Show gratitude. To your spouses, be thankful. Show gratitude. Because that's a synergistic interaction that happens. More people want to do more for you when you're grateful for them, right? So this kind of leads into this idea of well-being we talk a lot about. But I know that it's hard within our military culture to find things that we love to do, because oftentimes we don't have a lot of free time. But if you can find something that's beyond your professional identity, because I understand our occupational and professional identity are really important to us. But if you can find something that you love to do for the sake of doing it, that adds to your general feelings of well-being. You engage in this idea called flow. Flow is something that you engage in that is mentally demanding, but not too much, and that you take intrinsic joy from. You actually love doing it for the sake of doing it. It can be anything. It can be painting. It can be gardening. It doesn't matter. Right. Just anything that you're doing to take intrinsic joy from. These things are in what we call in the psychological business self-care. These are the things in which you can do to help minimize the psychological load that you're walking around with. And look, I know that the military culture and the veteran culture is stressful as hell, especially for like guys like you that are still in the uniform. You got to do a lot. There's a lot of psychological stressors that you have to do. The constant moving, the long work hours, all of these have a cumulative effect. So if you don't do things every day to practice self-care, to kind of give back to yourself, you will eventually have a fracture in your psychological health. That's just what's going to happen. It doesn't mean your character is deficient. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you are morally inferior. It is just a matter of your system can only take so much. And the military lifestyle is a lifestyle that requires a lot from you. It's going to put a lot on your plate. So it's only a matter of when, not if. So practice good self-care, and you can avoid the more detrimental effects of the allostatic load, as we call it in psychological literature.
Yeah, I love what you said there in the beginning. Practice self-care, then obviously practice self or gratitude.
Mm.
A lot of us take a lot of things for granted nowadays, and I think just practicing gratitude first thing in the morning kind of helps with what you're saying. Just like taking care of yourself first, so you can take care of others.
And if this is a little bit more of a motivator, because most salty sailors for sure, like we hate the word entitlement. That's so entitled. Gratitude is the antithesis of entitlement. So you want to put your money where your mouth is. You hate entitled people. Practice gratitude. That is the opposite. Yeah.
Awesome, Ryan. So Ryan, going to the second segment of our podcast here. So this is what I call the Fast Five. These are the same 5 questions I ask all my guests. Ryan, are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
All right. First question: what's one hobby you enjoy?
Oh man, I love 2 things. I love sucking at guitar, which is another thing with my flow, man. Just pick something to suck a little less at every day. And I pick up heavy things and put them down. Those are my 2. Those are 2 of my self-care things. Yeah.
Second question: if you had to choose one person to hang out with for one day, who would it be and why?
Yeah, I think it'd be Ben Franklin. And he just seems like a fascinating guy. He's got some inventions like under his belt. He's an architect of the Constitution, and it seems like out of all the people in history, that guy had a lot going on. So I think I'd like to chat with him.
Yeah, interesting life, sort of say. Yeah. Next question: recommend a book for our audience to read.
Well, I talk about this one a lot on my show, but it's Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And I won't give it away, but he is a survivor of the Holocaust, and he came out with a pretty profound story, obviously, but he also came up with logotherapy, which is basically essentially this: you can find meaning in life in 3 ways: contending with a worthwhile goal, connections with other people, so through social interactions, and creative pursuits. So if you could read that book, man, I think it would really hit home for the military identity. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that book.
Oh, you read it?
Yeah, I've read it a while back. Man, so many great inputs from Frankl.
Yeah. And this is something else that maybe the military identity kind of would relate to. He says, just endure.
Yeah. He talks a lot about suffering. Yeah.
So suffering can lead to meaning as well. Just enduring it and finding purpose in enduring the suffering. Yeah.
Finding purpose in the suffering.
Yeah. Right. And sometimes there is no purpose, but to endure. That's it. Yeah. And I guess, he talks a little bit about this when it comes to people who are experiencing cancer treatments. They live with a certain gratitude. They're just experiencing life day by day.
Yeah.
They're thankful for every day that they have.
Yeah. Imagine if we had that outlook, every day.
Yeah.
Just how we would be mental health wise.
Yeah.
All right. So next question: what's your favorite quote and why?
So I'm a Stoic. I do practice a little bit of the Buddhist tradition and the Stoic tradition. But Stoicism, we have a catchphrase, and it's "Remember, you die."
Yeah.
Of course, you can be said in Latin or in Greek, but it just reminds you, because I'm also an existentialist, that death comes for us all. Don't wait until tomorrow to say thank you. Don't wait until tomorrow to start whatever that project is that you want to do. Just live with purpose every day, because the immediate is all you know that you have for sure. Tomorrow may never come.
Yeah, I love that quote. Memento mori. Last question here, Ryan. What do you see yourself in a year, 5 years, or even 10 years from now?
Man, how about next week? So I guess the long and short of it
Where do you
is
see Vet with a Mic?
right. Yeah. So this is initially supposed to be a flagship. I want to eventually open up a nonprofit, and Vet with a Mic be the flagship of the nonprofit, where it's a one-stop shop, if you will, for mental health resources, just guidance that you can have, not providing any treatment, just resources, connect you with different support groups wherever local area in which you find yourself, for spouses and kids and military members and veterans. Yeah.
Awesome, man. So, again, before we go here, Ryan, I want to thank you for reaching out and connecting with me, and obviously, being on the podcast here and sharing a little bit about your story and what you're doing within the veteran community and how you're helping out with the mental health field. Before we go, though, where can they follow you? Where can they support you at?
Oh, well, unfortunately, I'm on all the social media platforms now. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. I guess probably the first way would be through Instagram. I'm probably the most responsive through that. And that's vet_talks, the number 4, the letter U. Of course, Vet with a Mic is the page that you can find us on Facebook as well. And some of you are probably already a friend of mine on Facebook, but the profile is Veteran Microphone, because Facebook made me have a profile to be able to open up the page. So,
okay,
yeah, I get a lot of questions, especially from like MA buddies, right? They're like, "Who is this?" And so as soon as they find out it's me, oh, okay, yeah. Or if I didn't directly serve with them, then they know that I'm in the game or in the ballpark of, oh yeah, okay, I was there at this time. Yeah, yeah. Because if you have a mutual friend in common with me, I try to add you just to help spread the word, because it takes many hands make for like work, so to speak. We need to mobilize all our veteran and military related resources to get some of these larger macro problems addressed. Yeah.
So I appreciate that, Ryan. Again, for our listeners and our viewers, that's Vet with a Mic. Reach out to him on Instagram or Facebook. And obviously go subscribe to his podcast, Vet with a Mic. Till then, Ryan, talk to you soon, brother. Take care.
Yeah, later.